Welcome to the Floyd Memorial Library podcast, where we sit down with the people who give shape, texture, and voice to life on the North Fork of Long Island. Some are rooted here by generations, others arrive by chance or choice, but all carry with them a piece of the story. We talk about what's changing, what's worth holding on to, and the currents of history, both quiet and loud, that run through this place. I'm your host, Christopher Bianchi, and for episode 145, we sit down with Mary Foster Morgan, an early founder of the Slow Food East End and a lifelong advocate for food, nature, and climate solutions. Mary's roots run deep here. Her family's history spans both the North and South Fork as well as Western New York. Her great-grandmother was born in Southold and graduated from Southold High School in 1880. Before moving to East Hampton, where Mary herself spent time visiting the family farm. Since helping to establish Slow Food East End back in 2004, Mary has become a vital voice in shaping how we think about food, wine, sustainability, and our relationship to the land. She's also been at the forefront of initiatives inspired by Project Drawdown and the growing movement about ReWilding, all while writing about wine and observing the East End's food landscape with care and insight. Mary's work blends local action with global vision, asking how communities like ours can nurture resilience in the face of climate change while keeping food, farming, and the natural world at the center of daily life. So I hope you enjoy episode 145 with Mary Foster Morgan. This episode was recorded June 11th, 2025. Thank you so much for coming on the Floyd Memorial Library podcast today. It's really great to have you on today.
Thank you, Chris. It's an honor, and I appreciate being invited, and it's a wonderful podcast series you have going.
Thank you so much. And in the beginning, before we go into your work with Slow Food and Drawdown and ReWild, can you tell us a bit about your background and what experiences or values early in your life led you down this path of food, nature, and climate advocacy?
Yeah, it's interesting. I was thinking about that question. So I grew up in kind of two places, my dad's hometown and my mom's hometown. My dad's hometown was Western New York, where there's 22,000 acres of grapes. It's a fruit belt. And my mom's hometown is East Hampton, Long Island. So, and farms and fishing. Mm-hmm. So I remember, they met during the Second World War. They were both in the Army. My mom was a control tower operator and my dad was a medic. And so we kind of grew up in that era where the Second World War was very prevalent to us, and we knew we were living in this kind of beautiful era of no wars. That had been taken care of. Mm-hmm. The food part, these sort of themes from my childhood were like food and sailing and resilience, I would say, and I'll explain that. So the food part was both visiting my grandmother in East Hampton, my grandparents, and also in Western New York. I remember my dad would come home from the office and say, "Okay, kids, pile in the car. I just learned about a new farm stand that has the most delicious strawberries or the most delicious peaches or great corn." And we would all pile in the car and go off to a little farm stand just outside of town. And usually they just were selling the strawberries or just selling the peaches. And we would bring the goods home, and my mom was not really a great cook, but she can cook corn. And you can eat peaches. She can cut up peaches, and strawberries are delicious. Another story about peaches is I remember visiting my father's father, my grandfather. On the weekends we visited a lot, and It was peach season, and he was going to cut up some peaches for us. And he held up this one peach and he said, "This peach is perfectly ripe today. It wasn't ripe yesterday and it will be overripe tomorrow. But today it's perfectly ripe and we're going to eat it." And that struck me, that he absolutely knew the moment when it was perfectly ripe. You could smell it, you could taste it. What kind of wrecked it for me was then he put vanilla ice cream on top. And I thought that really wrecked the peaches because it made the peaches cold and added another flavor that I didn't really like. So I think the combination of the two is a memory that sticks in my mind. And then visiting my grandparents in East Hampton, where my grandfather had a dairy farm, my grandmother actually was a really good cook if you like the English style of cooking, which is basically do nothing. And my uncle would come visit them with fresh fish because he was a fisherman and all ready to be broiled. And the do nothing grandma would just put a little bit of lemon on it, I think, and throw it in the broiler. It was so delicious. And we had raw clams and steamers. I love steamers, but I especially love my grandmother's clam pie, which I've replicated. So the food part was really a lot of local food and eating in season and enjoying what the local community had to offer, the local farmers, local fishermen. The sailing part was my mother, growing up in East Hampton, had been a sailor. And I even have one of her trophies, the first best lady skipper. She sailed snipes in 3 Mile Harbor. And my dad was a swimmer, and so he took to sailing. He loved sailing too. When I was maybe 10 or 11, my mother decided that my older brother and my sister and I would benefit from, and so the whole community would, from a sailing program, which didn't exist in Dunkirk Harbor. So she convinced the city of Dunkirk to let her run a sailing program, a free public sailing program. Wow. Probably the first, certainly in the area, maybe the first in the state, maybe the first in the nation. And she spent all winter designing this program, which was going to have a swimming lesson. So you had to pass the swimming lesson. It had exams to qualify you for the different levels that you could advance to, like starting with cabin boy, I think, and going up to Corinthian. And then she asked all her friends to be instructors. My sister and I were, because we had been sailing since we were 6 and 7, we became junior instructors. There was a gang of us who were junior instructors. And she convinced the town to let her buy 3 Rhodes Bantams, which are nice little racing boats with spinnakers. And it was really a great program. And she had a regatta at the end of the year. And I tended to win the regattas because even though I was one of the younger, older sailors, I must have been good. Yeah. So that. I really have continued to encourage young women particularly to go into sailing because I think it teaches resilience and confidence. Mm-hmm. And the resilience part, my parents were really great role models for me with resilience. They were kind of the people who would get up in the morning, put a smile on your face, and face adversity and deal with it. Maybe that's the whole World War II generation ethic. I don't know, but that was them, and they shared a lot in common. But when I was about 6, my little brother was born, and he was born with cerebral palsy and mental retardation. He had an umbilical cord wrapped around his neck, so he had ataxia, so lack of oxygen to the brain. And no one knew what was wrong with him because he looked totally normal, but my mother thought maybe he was deaf. So the first year of his life, I was in kindergarten, and after kindergarten, we would go from doctor to doctor, from hospital and institution to hospital, trying to find out what was wrong with him. And finally it was diagnosed that he would never talk. He'd never walk. He'd never really know who we were. He couldn't feed himself. He'd have to change his diapers. So that put a huge strain on the family. But my parents were really great about it.
Mm-hmm.
And my mother worked for eight years to find a good facility that would be helpful to him. And after all, she had other children to parent. So I think that motivated her really to start the sailing program. And my dad, the community service, that when we finally were able to find the right facility, he volunteered as legal services for years and years for that facility, because that was my dad. That's what he was like. So that was resilience. And I've often think my parents got a really bad deal, and maybe things would have been different growing up. But that's, wake up in the morning and put a smile on your face and deal with what life has to offer.
Yes, definitely. And then I was curious, just even going through schooling, were you interested even in science?
Yeah, I was interested in science, and it was the 50s and the 60s. Actually, it wasn't really encouraged for girls to go into science. I loved earth science. I really loved math, which shocked my parents, I guess. Like, why do you like math? They hated math. But I found math very, I don't know, there was something about math that it's very rational and steady. And maybe that, maybe growing up in the family that I did, the math was really a steadying kind of a language for me. But anyway, I love math, and I still do today. I remember taking math courses in college, and one of my math teachers talked about math as poetry. So I thought, well, that's, maybe that's why I like math. But science really interested me, and I would have loved to have taken more science classes in college. But actually, I think I was affected by the fact that, what does a woman do with science? It really was before marine science, which, I learned about later in life. And I did take a few biology courses, and I got very good marks, but I somehow didn't pursue it. I pursued art history instead, which was more writing and more study of history. And I'm interested in history, so that was probably part of my interest there. And also the creative mind. I admire artists, and I admire musicians and people in the arts, because I think they're very experimental and creative and open-minded.
Yes. And also just even coming out of high school, did you know you wanted to go into arts at that time? Or because you said you went into art history.
Yeah, actually, I was thinking about it, and I remember, I think you get these application forms when you're applying to colleges. What would you like to major in? And I think I said geology. But when I went to a women's college at the time when it was transitioning to being co-ed, Skidmore College in Saratoga Springs, New York. And so I don't think I ever took a geology class. Maybe my second thought was art history, and I got intrigued by it. Had a very nice art history department, and it was affiliated with the art department, so you had to minor in art if you majored in art history, and vice versa. So we had very interesting classes with artists in them who had very interesting ideas about the history of art. Always very vibrant classes. That was fun.
Yes. And then even coming out of college, what were you thinking?
Well, my mom came to visit, which she did quite a bit when I was in school, because she was living in East Hampton at the time. My parents had since divorced, and she could just drive up to Saratoga Springs. And we were walking around the college, and I think it must have been the fall of my senior year. I was like, I don't know what I'm going to do, Mom. What can you do with an art history degree? And we were looking at some of the bulletin boards where there was an announcement that the Whitney Museum had a program for young curators, and it was free to apply. You had to write an essay. And she said, why don't you apply to that? You could live in New York. And I said, oh, Mom, you're dreaming. But I thought, with a little encouragement, kids do really get motivated. So I wrote the essay, and I remember it being about Quenty's Slip, because the Whitney had opened a branch museum in Lower Manhattan on Wall Street, and I wrote an essay about the artists who lived on Quenty's Slip in the 60s, so this is now the 70s, who were Andy Warhol, Robert Rauschenberg, Jasper Johns, people like that. And it would be interesting to put an exhibit together of their work. And I was accepted, so I was thrilled. And then I spent the summer being a waitress and a housekeeper to try to make money to be able to pay the rent in New York. It was a great program. I really enjoyed it. There were about 12 of us. I was one of the youngest. Most of the people in the program had been to graduate school, and this was their kind of entree into their career. And you could tell who the stars were. There were people who went on to become directors of museums, which was, really terrific, and always maintained a friendship with them.
Yes. And so you said this was in the 70s?
This was now like 1973, 74.
Okay. And then did you end up staying in New York City?
Oh, yes. I stayed in New York for 20 years. Wow. I had a career in the arts, art world and museum administration and running small programs. My first job, I spent 8 years with the New York State Council on the Arts, and where we gave grants to artists. I met many, many artists, including Arden Scott, who I thought, wow, that's really interesting work this woman does with wood. I don't know if Arden remembers meeting me. That was quite a while ago. But, and of course, I knew Greenport, where she lived, because we had come here to visit with my grandparents. We'd come to, we would always come north to take the ferries across Shelter Island, a very cool thing to do, and lots of fun for kids. And then we would eat lunch at Mitchell's. I remember that. So in New York, I was worked for the New York State Council on the Arts for about 8 years, and then I saw this interesting job opening for an executive director of this group called VAGA, Visual Artists and Galleries Association. And what it was is a copyright society for American visual artists. And at the time, and thank goodness the laws have changed, but in the late 70s, early 80s, you had to get your work protected in copyright as a visual artist. Unlike musicians or writers, you had to put a copyright on your artwork. So artists, you would sign your name on the back of a painting with a copyright to make sure your work stayed in copyright. And of course, a lot of artists didn't do it. Keith Haring was just starting out. I know he started putting the copyright symbol and his name on the front of his artwork. Musicians and writers have agents and publishers, and they copyright their work. So they were making money when anyone used their artwork in a commercial or in a book. But visual artists were not making any money that way. They weren't getting paid. So we represented not only American artists and artists' estates. Actually, we represented the Andy Warhol estate, but we also represented European artists like Picasso, Matisse, and Man Ray, when their work somebody wanted to publish their work in a book or put it on the cover of an album, a record album, or use it in an advertisement, they should be paid. So that was what I did. I was busy calling up these artists and artist estates saying, we found out that this is happening, and we created a schedule of what we think would be the appropriate amount of you should be paid for, or do you want a cease and desist letter from one of our lawyers, or what, So that was very interesting. That group was then absorbed by a photography group, which really was a good thing because, photography is, does get republished a lot.
Yes.
And they really need copyright protection. And then my favorite job actually was working with the Guggenheim. I ran a children's program called Learning Through Art. And the idea was we would hire artists to go out into the public schools to use art or music or writing as a motivational tool to encourage children to learn. There was always a reading and writing component to the program. Artists would spend a year in a school, and at the end of the year, we would pull together some of the artwork and have an exhibition at the Guggenheim, which was fun. And then I could use my curatorial skills to put together that exhibition. And I remember the first one I did, I was a little nervous. But what I decided to do is, so people would understand what we were doing, is I quoted art educators and had labels of quotes on the wall next to the artwork about how valuable it is for children to be introduced to art and music, especially by artists in the public school system. And I remember I got a lot of good feedback from that. A lot of people really liked the exhibition. The first thing I did as executive director is I went to our board and I said, where do you want to be in 5 years? And they said, we want to be merged with the Guggenheim, because we actually weren't really merged. We were kind of a separate satellite program with our own board, raising our own money. So I thought, well, how to do that would be, we have to have, money in the bank. We have to have a really excellent program. And we have to show that we are actually making a difference with the kids' education. So we did have an evaluation done, which was stellar. And I started raising money. And I thought, well, I'll call on some of those artists that I know and I've met to ask them if they would like to come into the public schools, or if we could just use their name, or maybe during these exhibitions, we could have a celebration and give them an award for being a role model for children. And it really worked very well. I remember we called Keith Haring, and he said, sure, bring a class by. And he was really wonderful with the kids. And he said to me later, I'd really like to work with deaf children. But I could tell he was really sick. So he got quite sick after that. And it was just the end of the school year. So, through the summer he got sick. And we were never able to accomplish that. I called up David Byrne, and he said, I'd love to go out to a public school and meet kids. And we had a musician in a school, I think it was in Brooklyn, and the kids didn't really know who David Byrne was, but it was great. They were wonderful together. Then I called up Wynton Marsalis, who was just starting out, in his tenure as like the music director at the Lincoln
Center, jazz.
And I said, we'd love to do this. We'd love you to come meet kids in a school. Could we, if you're interested, could we bring the New York Times? Because this would be a really important moment for us. And then I could use it in fundraising, right? Mm-hmm. And he said, sure. So we ended up going to another school in Brooklyn. I remember it being the hottest, so hot. It was so hot, no air conditioning. And I was, oh my God, it's so warm. It could hardly move. It's so warm. And Wynton, such a gracious person. So he says to the principal, this just reminds me of New Orleans. I love it. We went into the classroom. It was kind of a big classroom, maybe a couple of classes together. The artist that we had in that school was a musician who made instruments from found objects. So the kids had all been bringing in, pieces of wood and things from their kitchen, and learning to make music from it, which Wynton really liked. And what I really loved was he put his arm around this musician. So the kids are, all minority, and our musician was our guy, from the Guggenheim was a white guy. And Winton, he puts his arm around this young guy and he says, "We're all musicians together, kids." It was a phenomenal moment. It was
Yeah.
very generous. And, I was able to raise some money on that with, beautiful statements from him. We had a very nice article in the New York Times. So I love that program because it really, kids weren't getting a lot of art and music, and they were using another part of their brain, and being experimental and trying new things out. And artists are great role models because they are, lifelong learners. And all of them a lot of them had master's degrees, and some of them had, doctorates. And they love going into the classroom, on an occasional basis, once a week, worked for them. I just think it was a great program, and it still exists today, and
Wow.
Doing its work.
Definitely. And I was just curious, go through the 70s and 80s, what you thought of New York City and living in New York City at that time.
Yeah, I know. New York, it was like the worst time for New York because it's supposed to have been so violent and financially, bankrupt or whatever. But there was a tremendously vibrant art scene. And New York is I love living in New York. It's a particularly interesting place if you have a lot of money, but I didn't, but you managed to find wonderful ways to participate in things, discount tickets or free things. New York now, with all the bike lanes and ways to, less traffic, it's really fabulous. But this was when Soho was just getting started. And Tribeca didn't even exist, and when I first moved there, and I eventually moved to Tribeca and lived with an artist girlfriend of mine in a loft for a while, and I had to grocery shop in the West Village, and then you take the subway or walk like a number of blocks to where we lived. It was really there were no supermarkets nearby. But what did I think of it? I thought New York was a vibrant place, really terrific, with people from all cultures, and the art scene was, opened up people from all over the world came to New York, as artists. I mean, Eastern Europe and Africa and South America and all over from all over the United States. It was really great.
You got to meet a lot of
I met a lot of people, yeah.
Yeah. And you felt, because I guess people might say, looking at that time, did you feel comfortable, like going around the city and walking around at that time?
I'm tall. I'm 5'9", and I remember when I first moved to New York, I was very worried about, especially in the winter when it gets dark so early, like how can I walk from the subway station on 86th Street to my apartment on 78th Street, I think. But it was a number of blocks, and I would walk where where the lights were, of course, and if I thought I heard somebody following me, I would pop into one of the many bars that were on the Upper East Side at the time. And sometimes I would just stand in the doorway and the bartender would look at me and laugh. And I would say, yeah, I'm just waiting for a couple of minutes and leave. And I'd always get my key ready, before I got to my door. But I was nothing ever happened. And I remember being pushed once by someone, and when he realized I was a woman, not a man, he said, "Oh, I'm so sorry." And I realized, wow, men get pushed around a lot by other men, That was nothing really happened, but I was careful.
Mm-hmm. So did you end up working all the way up into the 90s in New York City?
Yes, I moved here to Greenport, and I think it was not 95 or 6.
Oh, okay.
So I was in New York working at the Guggenheim in the 90s, yeah.
And you said you would before that, you would go to the South Fork and visit family out there. But then you had already had visited the North Fork, but how did that decision come about
To move to
to move
Greenport?
to Greenport?
Well, I'd been married, and I was teaching my husband to sail. We chartered a sailboat, and we came into Greenport, sailed in before there was, the beautiful docks now. And we both said, wow, this is really potential here. This is great. And we decided we would spend the month of August renting. So we rented a house on Sterling, I think it was, and fell in love with the idea. Aldo had opened his bakery, and you could smell his wonderful bread and croissants every morning. Like, who wouldn't want to live someplace where there's an Aldo's coffee shop? So we decided we would try to buy something, and we found a place on Sterling, actually, and so it's by the harbor. It was a little out of our price range, and so we put an offer down, and it was not accepted. But then we got a phone call a couple months later, because the couple that had agreed to buy at the price they wanted couldn't get a mortgage, and that couple was divorcing, and I think they really wanted to sell. So we were next in line, and we were able to buy this house at a very good price. So we had our summer house, our weekend house. We would come out by bus and sometimes rent a car, but mostly came out by bus and be able to walk right through Greenport and stay at our summer place. So when we decided to split up, I decided, well, maybe I'll just move out to our summer place in Greenport and see if I can, make it work.
Yes.
Can I rent part of it, or can I find a full-time job and all of that? So that's what I did. And I was near my mom, it was a quick drive through Shelter Island to go visit her in East Hampton.
Yes. No, that's interesting. And even you felt like it was somewhat affordable out here.
This was,
at that time.
This was the mid-'80s, so it was affordable. Prices were starting to go up, and they weren't the fantastic deals that people got in the 70s I've heard of, but we could afford it just,
Yes.
with our little studio apartment in New York.
Yes. And just the environment, even, because I know you had come out even when Mitchell's was still there,
as a
but
kid.
Coming back later and seeing that was empty, but just it was going through a transition.
It was going through a transition, absolutely. I think Dave Capel was soon to be mayor, if not mayor at the time. And there was a lot of discussion about what to do with Mitchell Park. Actually, one of the things I remember is getting a postcard from the mayor saying we have some excess funds because the police force has been merged with the Southold police force. We're not double paying anymore. What should we do with it? And there was kind of there was kind of a short questionnaire. Should we upgrade the waterfront? Should we give the money back to Greenporters?
Yes.
There was a third one, and maybe the fourth one was a write-in. And I remember overwhelmingly, like over 90% of the population wanted to do something about Mitchell Park and make us a real working, keep the working, waterfront, but also add more docks and make it a real park and make it into a community center, which it has become. So that was really exciting to be part of that. And you could feel Greenport was changing, and it was slowly, in my view, slowly changing.
Yes.
Alda's was still there and remained there for years and years and years. So that he was like a keystone to the whole place. And
yes. And then did you start getting more involved in the community through slow foods later into starting in the 2000s, and
Yes. When I moved out full time, I wanted to know more about the wine region, which maybe had a 12 or so wineries at the time. This is like the late 80s.
Oh, okay.
Partly because that grandfather with the peach, my foster grandfather, his father had run a nursery called Foster Nursery, and I didn't realize it at the time, but he sold grape rootstock. Now that was, Western New York, 22,000 acres of grapes. They're all native grapes. They're Concord, Niagara, Delaware, the red, white, and blue grapes. And that grandfather made wine, like everybody's grandfather made wine. My grandfather had a little bit of a German background, so he made a white wine out of Niagara grapes, and we would have some of Grandpa's wine when we'd come go visit. We always had the wine before dinner, and usually with an ice cube, and it was sweet, and it tasted very grapey, and you didn't want to drink too much because it gave you a crashing headache. And I remember saying to my Grandpa, why don't we ever have wine with dinner like the French? Why don't you make French style wine? And he said, because I don't have French grapes, which I thought was a joke. But when I moved out to Greenport and started looking into the wine region, I realized that actually he was right. He was making wine from Native American Vitis labrusca, which means wild grapes. What the North Fork and South Fork of Long Island were planted in was European wine grapes, Vitis vinifera. It's a different species. It's a species that has been cultivated for 8,000 years to create grapes that make delicious wine. I mean, that's like cultivating roses. I mean, that's like cultivation of rice. I mean, it's really many centuries of cultivation to bring forth a really vinifera means wine bearing, so wine bearing grape, very good wine. So I wanted to know more, and had met Troy Gustafson through my friend Joe Townsend, who had known my family, and I said, why doesn't the Suffolk Times have a wine column? And he said, I've got no one to write it. And I said, well, I'll write it, but it's going to be very basic. It's going to be, what is Chardonnay? What is Merlot? What is Cabernet Sauvignon? He said, okay, fine. So I started writing this column, and that's how I met my husband, Tom, because as I would be talking to people, they would say, you're really asking too many questions of great detail, and Tom Morgan knows the answer. So I called Tom up one time and said, I really would like a quote for a Thanksgiving article. And it was a great quote that he gave me. I don't remember what wine we were talking about at the time. And he invited me over to his office at Lens, and he had said on the phone, are you looking for a job? And I thought, well, that's pretty, very knowledgeable of him to say that, because I don't think I revealed that when I was talking to him, but he kind of guessed that that's what I was looking for, something full time. And we hit it off. It took me 6 months to get him to ask me out on a date, but we had nice phone conversations, and we'd meet at Aldo's for coffee. But he's the one who basically explained a lot about wine to me in terms of the 8,000 years of cultivation, and how the North Fork is planted exclusively in vinifera, which made us different from the Finger Lakes, which has European, French, American hybrids, because they thought for years that it was too cold to grow vinifera there, and very different from the wineries that cropped up in Western New York, which they do make wine out of the Lambrusca native grape. So that started my interest in wine, and my knowledge base in wine is, and I would go to blind tastings, which I recommend to everybody, because you really learn a lot tasting blind, because you're really thinking about what you're tasting, you're feeling the the wine in your mouth. You're tasting it. You're comparing it to other wines. And you learn from experts who will tell you later, how you scored something, what you were tasting. So I learned a lot from blind tastings.
And how long did you do that?
I wrote for the Suffolk Times. I did get hired full time running the alumni department at Southampton College when that existed.
Yes.
So I still kept on writing the wine column because I was really fascinated with the wine region. So I did that for a number of years. And Southampton College, I really liked that job. The college was changing. You asked me about science. On Eastern Long Island, there is a lot of science going on, especially marine science. And I noticed an ad in the New York Times for a director of development and public relations of the marine program of Cornell Cooperative Extension. So I've been working in Southampton for 3 or 4 years by then, and I'm not a happy driver. I did not like driving that hour to Southampton, an hour back from Greenport.
No, that's not. Yeah.
So it was both the draw of maybe learning something about marine science and also the closer to home. I jumped at the chance to apply for that job.
Mm-hmm.
So then I started working for Cornell, which I then stayed for 10 years working at Cornell.
And what type of work were you doing?
This is now 20 years ago, right? So we were, there was a lot going on in the Marine Division with helping introduce scallops into the Peconic Bay system and supporting the fishing industry. And people didn't really know about it. So I spent a lot of time the first year getting stories out about what these different scientists were doing. And at the end of the year, I remember the director of the whole science program asked me to sit down with Kim Tetreault, who was the marine biologist in charge of the lab, really, the nursery for growing out oysters, clams, and scallops, to brainstorm ideas for how we could bring in more attention and money to the Marine Science Division. Kim talked for 2 hours. And if you know Kim, he can talk for 2 hours. And I was busy writing notes. And at the end of the meeting, I said, well, I see 2 programs that could be put in place right away that could bring in money to the Marine Science Program and also fulfill your mission. One is Kim going out into the public schools. I know that I had just been working at Southampton College, so I knew that there weren't any programs of marine science. I mean, this is a marine scientist actually working in the field in the high school level. So high schools would pay for him to do, teach and do lab programs with them. Probably grade schools as well.
Okay.
And I said, that's one program, you get that going right away. And the second one is this interesting idea of a community-based shellfish restoration project, kind of modeled after one that was getting started in the Chesapeake. I said, I think we could get that going here in Southold. Now, this was December. And so we were challenged, go ahead, get that started. And it became known as SPAT. First started at Southold Project for Aquaculture Training, now Suffolk Project for Aquaculture Training. I did a lot of publicity, put together a program for opening our doors to let the public in. I remember I wrote the headline of one of the publicity articles I wrote was, come to the Cornell Marine and meet an oyster, something like that. So it was January, and we had like 40 or 50 people come in January to the Marine Science Center to learn about this new program that was being offered for a very inexpensive price. If you were to take a marine biology class at Southampton College, you pay, over $1,000. Cornell offered the SPAT program for $150 or $100, whatever it was. You could also work in the lab in the mornings, and something that again, Southampton College couldn't or didn't offer, you could receive millions, really, hundreds of thousands of spat, little oysters, baby oysters, that if you could either grow out in the creeks around the Cornell Marine program, or if you had a dock and you passed the inspection, you could grow them off your dock.
Yeah, okay.
And the beauty of the program was you could keep 50% of what you grew, and the other 50% would go back to build an oyster reef. So we were adding to the diversity of the Peconic Bay region, advancing the oyster population, and also people were able to introduce oysters into their own system. And oysters, as you may know, are very regenerative. They filter water, and they clarify water for other plants and animals in the Peconic Bay system, and also their food for other, for fish. And they're basically a keystone species. They are the basis for a lot of other species to be able to thrive. So it was a win-win kind of situation. And we were invited to make a presentation at one of the marine science national programs. And I remember giving a talk on how you start and run a program like this.
Wonderful. And then to get to Slow Food East
Slow
End,
Food, right?
You helped start that back in 2004.
Right.
What inspired that movement locally?
I was working at Cornell at the time, and Tom was working at Lens. He'd been there for many years. He's got basically a 40-year career in the wine business. And there's a group in Italy that started called Slow Food. And how that happened was McDonald's wanted to move into the Spanish Steps in Rome and have a fast food restaurant. And there were many writers and people who, lovers of Rome, who said, wait a minute, no, Rome is not about fast food. Rome is about slow food. And the leader of that movement is Carlo Petrini, who then ended up founding an effort called Slow Food, which it took Europe, by storm, really. It was all over Europe, and finally came to America. And there was a Slow Food USA getting started at that time, based in New York. And some of the staff came out to look at the wine region and to stay at the American Hotel. They'd gone to Lens, and they were staying at the American Hotel. And we had gone over for, I guess, dinner. And Ted Conklin had said who's the proprietor of the American Hotel, and actually a distant cousin of mine, had said to Tom, we really should start our own slow food chapter out here. And I heard that, and I thought, yeah, I remember farm stands on the South Fork that didn't exist anymore. There were no farmers markets. There were certainly no school gardens, edible gardens in schools. That idea hadn't come to the East Coast yet. There was, who heard of a CSA, community supported agriculture? There was nothing like that. And I thought, well, this is fantastic. This is a way to keep agriculture and fishing on the east end of Long Island, so we don't just become a big tourist center. So I was all in. So the three of us, together this program of events at the American Hotel, which attracted a lot of people, where Ted would get as many local purveyors as he could to where he could buy oysters or whatever it was from. And we would have these slow food cocktail parties or dinners. And we expanded it out to other restaurants. And the idea was that the restaurant, we would say, look, you pick the day of the week, you give us the price. What we ask you to do is to have as much as possible of the elements of the dinner be local, including the wine. There was no local beer. And we're building an audience. And, the chef, that was Tom's idea. He said, we need to get the tastemakers to take the lead on this, because people will follow the chefs. And that's, I think, why it blossomed so quickly. And also two leaders of the group One was Brian Hallwell. He was asked to be a leader of our ad hoc slow food chapter. He said, "No, actually, I'm starting a new magazine called Edible East End." And we said, "Okay, you go do that, Brian." But he also worked with Kate Plum to start a farmers market in Sag Harbor.
Okay.
So there was a lot of confluence of interests going on, and it really mushroomed quite quickly.
Mm-hmm. And how has the meaning of local food evolved? For
Well,
you?
I realized that the local food piece, as I said in the beginning, has been an important theme in my life. It's delicious, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's the best way to eat locally, in my view. So as I learned more about it and how eating locally is so valuable to living within a climate lifestyle. If you're, I got very concerned about climate change a few years back and wanted to learn more about what can I do personally in my life to make a difference. And read the book Drawdown by Paul Hawken. And one of the things he says is, this is a book about 100 solutions to reverse global warming. They're ranked and rated. The top 3 solutions, one of them includes diverting food waste from the waste stream. Why? Because food waste in the waste stream emits methane, and it's even more powerful than carbon as a greenhouse gas polluter. So it's like, oh yeah, food waste. Well, it wasn't really what I did much with food anyway, because, I'm a person who loves to make broth out of bones, that kind of thing. But the more I learned, the more intrigued I got. And one of the things Paul Hawken says is, pick the solution you love and learn as much as you can about it. Mm-hmm. So I thought, well, food. There's food waste, there's making compost out of food scraps. How does all that fit into a lifestyle is that something that I can do in my life and feel like I'm living in a way that is not hurting the climate but helping the climate? And regeneration, which is actually the title of Paul Hawken's latest book, second book, because he's written a third book called Carbon. Regeneration is the fact that you can actually farm or live or fish in a way that not only maintains the biodiversity of an area, but also helps regenerate it. And the oyster farmers out here are actually helping regenerate our Peconic Bay, because the oysters, as I said, are, fish feed on them. They're shelter for a nursery for young fish. They keep the water clear, so they eelgrass thrives around them. So they're really and they're filter feeders, so they're filtering out a lot of the pollutants and things in the water. So they're really helping keep us in fishing as well as oyster farming. Mm-hmm. There's a way to farm regeneratively, and there's farms out here now that have grass grazed beef, like 8 Hands, and chickens, free-range chickens. Also, when you farm so that you don't, you have a cover crop year-round, you're not disturbing the soil, which is emitting carbon into the atmosphere. It's kind of old-fashioned farming. Mm-hmm. And, I'm not an expert at it, but I know a little bit. And I look for the farm stands and the farmers that are farming regeneratively. KK's farm, the farm in Southold is a biodynamic farm that is regenerative with an added component of the whole biodynamic piece. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of farms out here really, really working to keep us in farming, keep a very healthy way to farm. And I've even developed an acronym. The more I've how can I explain this to people and to myself, I've developed an acronym called LOW, which is you start off local. Local will be if we want to, as we go shopping every week, Tom and I, we start locally. buy as much local as possible. Then the next is O, organic or regenerative. Choose organic or regenerative foods. And waste nothing. That's the W. Waste nothing. Nothing goes to waste. It all gets recycled either into, a sandwich for the next day, or pizza toppings, or a soup, or a broth. And we obviously have a compost bin. And then you can add the seasonally ripe, delicious part, so you can make it slow. And we've been enjoying delicious strawberries and asparagus, coming up with concocting new ways to have asparagus. I recently, we created this pasta dish, which I'm sure is the staple of many restaurants. I just don't know about it, which is basically asparagus. Well, Tom's a mushroom hunter, so he came home one day with meadow mushrooms, and he said, these are delectable mushrooms. We should make some kind of pasta. So we had asparagus, we had meadow mushrooms that we sauteed, we added a little mascarpone to them, and then we had delicious ham from 8 Hands Farm, which added just the right touch. And we've been having this pasta dish like several times a week. It's so delicious.
Wow.
Enjoying our little creation there.
Yes. And I think there is something special about that, with getting even everything on your plate is from the land here or local. I think that does something for the mind mentally.
I like hearing that. Yeah. I think it does. I think it feeds your mind and your soul. It really does.
Yeah.
And for me, it takes me back to going to farm stands with my parents, or in East Hampton with my grandmother. We would go to, all of her friends had farm stands, and we also went to Stewart's Fish Market because she knew Stewart, and he had basically a co-op with fishermen in Amagansett, and we would go there and say, hi, Stewart, and he had this beautiful Labrador, I remember. We always loved to pet and get the freshest fish, or my uncle would bring home fresh fish. So there's something really delicious, and it does feed your soul to eat locally and in season, which we're pretty strict about. And just knowing that you're going to wait for the strawberries, and now the peas are just coming into to the farm stands. You're going to wait for them to make some really delicious pea soups and peas and rice, or a pea pasta with peas. It's nice. Yes. And it's the way I grew up. My dad saying, we're going to this farm stand with the most fantastic corn that's in season. They have a white and gold corn, and we're gonna get some.
Yes. And then so even as you mentioned the wine columnist, but you've been a close observer of the North Fork's food landscape. What changes have you seen, and how we grow, sell, and talk about food and wine?
Well, I like all the positive changes that have happened. Yes. I mean, to me, we have this community preservation fund that we all voted for, which is people call the 2% transfer tax. That is allowing our town to work with the county to protect farmland. And a lot of farmers have participated in being able to sell their development rights so that they're either their children or other neighbors, or wineries can be buying their land for farming, for vineyards. I was on the board of the Peconic Land Trust for a couple of years when it was transitioning from helping purchase land to now helping people love the land and conserve the land and learn about sustainability. And I remember meeting I'm trying to think of his name, a developer who would tell this great story. And I would say, you really have to come to all the Peconic Land Trust events and tell your story, because he had property that is now McCary Vineyards, had been a vineyard, I think, before then, but then was up for sale. And the development rights were not sold from it. So he was going to buy the land and develop it. And he said he was having years and years of trouble with the town to get, he had to spend money to put in a roadway and I don't know, different things that he had to do infrastructure-wise. And finally, his lawyer said to him, I think maybe we should be looking at this a different way. Maybe you should go talk to John Halsey of the Peconic Land Trust, because maybe there's something there that you can do with them that would involve development, but maybe it's not such a big scale. And that's the story he told. He said he worked with the Peconic Land Trust and realized he could make more money by not developing the land, but selling the development rights and then selling the land underneath to another vineyard that became McCary. And he kept several 5-acre lots on the Sound side, which he then sold as a premium to people who wanted to build homes. So this is called a conservation concept, conservation development concept, where you really maximize the property to, for the developer, the owner, but also you're conserving most of the property that's good soil for farming.
Yes.
I know his name, Thornton Smith. He has since passed away, but I would say, Thornton, you really, and he was a great, bon vivant kind of speaker. And I would say you really have to tell the story, because your final sentence is such a great tagline, like, and I made more money doing it this way than I would have if I'd had my 100 houses. So I love it that we've enlarged. I mean, there's now 60 or 70 wineries, and we have 30 oyster farmers, and we have a farmers markets. So we have a year-round farmers markets in Riverhead with East End food, and it's really taken off. And for a while we had school gardens with every school. So I'm hoping that we stay in farming and fishing, which is, the basis of our economy out here.
Yes, absolutely. And then could you talk about, you also co-founded a local initiative inspired by Project Drawdown.
Oh, yeah.
What drew you to this approach, and what does reversing global warming look like on the East End?
Well, the idea that Drawdown's one of its top solutions had to do with food, I was really drawn to that. A friend of mine had read Paul Hawken's book, and she called me up and said, "This book has changed my life." So I thought, wow, that's, and I knew we were both commiserating about what can we do about climate change. And so I started looking into it too, and we decided we would start a group called Project Drawdown East End, and there were drawdown groups being kind of mushrooming up all around the country. And I called up Beth, the editor of East End Beacon, and I said, we'd like to write an article in East End Beacon. We'll do it for free. I can get my colleagues to contribute. So Mark Hobner and I, who I met through Drawdown, because we shared values about concern about climate. He and I, talked to Beth and said we would keep this column going called Climate Local Now. And we've been writing it for a couple of years now, and inviting guest writers to come write. But what drew me to the whole idea of 100 solutions to reverse global warming is that somebody had gone around and pulled together the science and said, there are solutions, and they exist today, and they're economically viable, and they're feasible, and we just have to implement them and scale them. And Mark and I, with another colleague, Sherry Thirlby, approached the town of Southold and said one of the solutions to reversing climate change or global warming is to divert food waste from the waste stream. And we'd like to try a pilot program with your consent to have 30 families for over 30 days participate in a pilot where we would ask them to put their food waste not in a yellow bag, but in a green bucket that we'd provide them, and they would bring their bucket to the town transfer station and put it where you guys say to put it. The town consented to everything but letting us dump the food scraps. They didn't want it in their compost. So we made an arrangement with Trieber Farm to bring the food scraps to their farm for their compost over the 30-day period. We weighed everything. We inspected all the buckets. Everyone was 100% compliant with the way we had organized the program of what was allowed and not allowed. And we were able to report back to the town that we diverted a ton of food scraps from those 30 families over 1 month. And we had a lot of good comments from them about they really liked doing this. They liked participating in something that was so positive. They felt great that they weren't adding methane anymore, that something good was coming out of their food scraps. What's happened now is that the town is doing an experimental pilot with 100 families. And also, in meeting with Nick Krupski, who's now the solid waste manager, he said, no, I'd really like to encourage more backyard composting because it's good for the soil, less transportation costs for individuals, less expense of yellow bags.
Yes.
So he's just announced a website where you can get a discount on backyard composters, like 40 or 50% discount. And there's going to be a pickup. They'll all be delivered to Southold. There'll be a pickup date. I think it's July 26th. So the program continues in various forms of helping divert food scraps from the waste stream.
I think the town has kind of picked up on that more recently and gotten more proactive with
Proactively,
it.
yes. Yeah, exactly. I've done a little bit of research on how this works in other towns and what's made it successful. And I want to do more, but sort of anecdotally, my guess is that what works really well is to have a program where people can, where there's a pickup service.
Yes.
And people pay for the pickup service, which means that the pickup service will refuse to pick up if there's some, what we call contamination in the food scraps, if there's plastic bags or meat bones or whatever it is not allowed. So you're right at your home. You are either in the program, you're either accepted or not accepted. You learn pretty quickly what the pickup service will allow. And that has worked in different towns around New York State and in New England. I'd like to do more research. Maybe I'll write a column about it because what works in towns and the big stumbling block is what we call contamination, is that people forget or they don't think about it and they just throw the bread wrapper, the plastic wrapper in with the food scraps into their bucket and but there's a way for the town to enlarge this and to expand it and to have pilot programs that can be expanded where people are educated and they feel part of being part of a solution. And also a lot of towns will give back the beautiful compost that is made from the scraps.
Yes.
At the end of the year.
Yes. And then you mentioned that project, but were there any other local solution or projects you've been most excited about recently?
Well, I did join ReWild North Fork.
Yes.
That's a group that is involved with rewilding mostly gardens and mostly land. But in my mind, rewilding includes oceans and bays because bringing back the wildlife is going to, it's all part of the biodiversity piece. You can't, let the whales become extinct or we're going to lose our plankton, which has a lot to do with the oxygen we breathe. So it's, it's more than just land, but I love the idea of rewilding for pollinators and monarch butterflies and the honeybees. And after all, we are a fruit belt here. We have beautiful farms with tree fruits. So we need our pollinators. But also, I asked the two founders of the North Fork chapter, Nancy and Ralph, Reinerston if I could start a drop-off program at a farm, if a farm was interested in allowing people to come with their food scraps to drop them off at a site at the farm to make into compost, for farm compost. And I would monitor it. So they said yes. So this is now the second year of a food scrap drop-off pilot, I call it, at Deep Roots Farm in Southold. Last year we had 64 families, and we ended up diverting about 2 tons of food scraps. The farm was very happy. We had no contamination. I think they feed some of the scraps to their chickens and pigs, but mostly they make compost out of it. And they love being part of the community effort to, is another way to help reverse climate, global warming. History has been a theme in my life. So the other piece is that, especially, I guess, living closer to East Hampton, where I kind of feel is my second home or my summer home. And certainly, I grew up in Western New York and in East Hampton. There's a lot of feeling of home in both places because they were, my father's family had for several generations lived in Western New York, and my mother's family for several generations lived in East Hampton. And visiting my grandparents, the dairy farm in East Hampton, it was a beautiful old house that had a lot of history going back to the deed on the wall of 1792, and all the furniture in the house seemed to be, American wood. It turns out a lot of it is Domini furniture, which was their closest neighbor. That was the great-grandparent who bought the property, Abraham Sherrill, in 1792. He was the closest neighbor to the Dominis at that time, and he had fought in the Civil War, fought in the Revolution rather. And I'm really intrigued by his life because East Hampton was occupied by the British for 11 years. And what was he doing all that time when he was in Washington's army or acting as a Minuteman? And then he obviously didn't go to Connecticut or Massachusetts like others, young men at that time. He stayed in East Hampton. I think his mother was alive. I think his younger brothers and sisters were there. I'm intrigued, so I'm delving into that history, and I know that there's connections too with the North Fork because there was a lot of intermarriage between the two forks. In fact, my grandfather's mother was from Southold, so when we would come visit and have lunch at Mitchell's. I think he was remembering that his mother grew up in Southold. It was fun.
Definitely.
So I'm writing the story for myself, doing the research, but also for my nieces and nephews.
Yes. And you've also used the term climatarian.
Oh, climatarian, yeah.
What does that term mean to you? And how has it shaped your daily life, both in the kitchen and beyond?
Yeah, thanks. I don't think it's caught on very much, climatarian. It might be more popular in Europe, I'm not sure. But it means living a lifestyle where, like vegetarian or pescatarian, you're using food to be the solution that you're really running with in terms of living within the capacity of the Earth's ability to regenerate itself. So again, I come back to the SLOW, living seasonally, when purchasing things that are seasonally, they're deliciously ripe and local as much as possible. So there's no transportation emissions going on, and you're supporting the local economy. Organic, regenerative, which now we have farms here that absolutely fit that profile, and waste nothing. That's big. Waste nothing.
Yes,
in fact, I don't even think we use the word waste in our house. We recycle everything. What is this good for?
Yes. And now just living out here, surrounded by water, farm, and preserved land, how do you think this place shapes people's awareness of the climate crisis, or sometimes insulates them from it?
I think the people who've lived here all their lives, or in my case, have relatives, grandparents, I think they're very aware of
Hmm.
the inter interaction between, earth, sky, sea, and how they all affect each other, and the importance of our community that's based in farming and fishing and local stores. We've lost a lot of that in East Hampton. When I was little, my grandmother, there were all local stores in East Hampton Village, and everyone knew, hello, Mrs. Cheryl. They would all knew her. She knew everyone who, all the store owners. So they've lost a lot of that connection, and I'm not so sure that. I think people do come out here with a mindset of we're sort of a nice place to be and a little bit of a Disneyland of beauty, and hopefully their children are educating the adults that it's more than just a pretty place. We're
Yeah.
really a real place. We're a real place with real biodiversity that needs to be protected, with dark skies that need to be protected so that our birds aren't distracted by light that shoots up.
Hmm.
We're a flyway. One of the things I learned at Cornell was that because we're kind of this boat sticking out into the ocean, we are the most southern place for northern fish and for northern vegetation, northern flowers and trees. And we're the most northern place for southern fish and southern vegetation and southern trees. So we really are in a unique situation here, with a lot of bounty that needs to be protected, and we're nurseries for a lot of animals and plants. So we don't want to pave it over.
No, and I think people can sometimes take it for granted too, but when people do come out here, because I think people that whether they've grown up more central Long Island or in the city, we're kind of the last place that has been somewhat untouched. So it really is important for
Yeah,
that.
it is. And everyone can get involved by supporting our wonderful nonprofits who are,
Yes.
environmentally based. The Peconic Land Trust, a group for the East End, ReWild, North Fork, Audubon, Cornell Marine Program. I mean, there's lots. Pick the solution you love.
Yes. And you had talked about your husband, Tom. He's a naturalist and a mushroom forger. Could you talk a little bit about his work out here and what he's done? Or
Well,
his
yeah,
importance?
I know he was a biology minor in college, and so he really he's taught me a lot about being a naturalist, and he's a birder. He really can sight birds that I'm like, where? And we have eagles visiting us in Orient, especially from January to March. And he's a mushroom hunter. So he's introduced me to a lot of mushrooms. His background is, I know that he was working in New York long before I knew him, as in wine futures for different wine establishments. And he came out to Eastern Long Island, I think intrigued by the wine region just as I was, and he worked for Peter and Pat Lenz, which was the second or third oldest winery here. So he's been with Lenz for 30 years. And he really does know a lot about wine and the history of wine, and he's a very good taster. And he's really has been a great promoter of the wine region, knowing that it was all vinifera and a lot about the geology and biology of the region, that we are one of the sunniest places in the Northeast. I think Cutchogue has more sunny days than any place else in the Northeast. And we have this beautiful climate that is very cool springs. So fruit trees and grapes ripen slowly. There's no chance of frost at bud break. We do get mildew in the summer. That's where Cabernet Sauvignon, which is very close, the grapes are very close together, so you can get a little bit of mildew there. But the Chardonnay grows beautifully out here, Merlot beautifully out here, and Cabernet is Sauvignon is tricky, but it grows beautifully also. And then what makes it grow beautifully is that it ripens beautifully. We have these long summer falls from September, October, November. I remember him saying, we're not going to pick the Cabernet until November this year because we have this gorgeous fall happening. And the grapes just get slowly ripening to the right Brix level, which is a meter of sugar level, and you get this beautifully varietal ripeness. I talk about my grandfather and saying the peach was perfectly ripe. I completely get that because there's that one day when it's perfectly ripe, the varietal ripeness is there, and he knew it. You could smell it with the peach, you could taste it with the peach. He knew that the next day would be overripe and the day before was underripe. Same with grapes. So this is a really excellent place to grow fruit and grapes, and it deserves its celebrity as a very good wine region.
Yes. I know you talked about grassroots effort, and it can be the process can be slow and frustrating at times, but what keeps you grounded and motivated moving forward with some of the efforts?
Starting Slow Food and those kind of grassroots
slow
efforts?
Food, ReWilding and...
Well, the people who are involved are we all share the same mission, I guess you would say, with Slow Food. It is eating locally and supporting our local community and loving everything when it's delicious. And with Slow Food, we had to encourage that kind of ethic. We had potlucks that I hope continue today, where people would bring something they made from whatever was local and ripe in season. And great cooks, great home cooks sharing our recipes. With ReWild, it's the same thing. There are a lot of master gardeners involved in ReWild, and I am not a master gardener. I'm learning to garden. But it's very exciting to be part of that effort to bring back our pollinators, keeping our songbirds and our native species, our butterflies. It's a fantastic effort, and it's fun to be part of.
Yes. And then just looking ahead, what are your hopes for the future of the North Fork and its community down the line? It could be related to the environment, but just in general too. What would you hope to see?
Well, I see a lot of good, progress happening in terms of keeping us on fishing and farming, which, to me, the basis of our economy is the environment. A lot of people are waking up to that, and a lot of different efforts going on, not only with the environmental work and master gardeners, but also with artists. My hope is that everyone continues to recognize, that we humans live off the earth.
Yes.
We don't, we need to regenerate it. And there are ways to do that. It's not just sustaining it, but even regenerating it so that it can start to heal itself.
Yeah. It's not just taking and taking.
Right.
Yeah.
There's a biologist, E.O. Wilson, who recently died, and he's very prominent in the field of biology, and he's started a foundation called Half Earth. And the idea is that the Earth can regenerate. We can completely regenerate if half of Earth is allowed to go wild. It's very positive.
Yes, absolutely. No, and just I usually just ask at the end if there are any other last minute things you wanted to say or discuss that we haven't talked about.
I would just repeat Paul Hawkins, pick a climate solution you love and run with it and really make it yours.
Yes. Well, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to come on the podcast today and share your story.
Thank you, Chris.
And really all the work you're doing in the area. It's important for the North Fork.
Thank you.
Well, I hope you enjoyed episode 145 with Mary Foster Morgan. I want to thank you for listening to the Floyd Memorial Library podcast, and we'll see you next time.